The first time Martin Lawson noticed tire tracks cutting through his meticulously maintained boxwood hedge, he dismissed it as an accident. The second time, he considered it carelessness. By the third time, with fresh tracks appearing overnight and another section of his beloved hedge crushed beyond salvation, Martin knew it was deliberate, and he had a pretty good idea who was responsible. Martin had moved to Oak Ridge Estates 2 years ago, seeking the quiet suburban life after 30 years as a mechanical engineer in the city. The modest colonial house with its sprawling yard had been perfect, a place where he could finally indulge his passion for gardening. The boxwood hedge along his corner lot had become his pride and joy, a living boundary that he shaped and nurtured into a verdant wall of glossy leaves that neighbors often complimented. All except one neighbor, Cynthia Harrington, the self-appointed queen of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. From his kitchen window that Sunday morning, Martin watched Cynthia's pearl-white Mercedes SUV roll to a stop outside her 3-story McMansion across the street. She emerged wearing tennis whites despite never having been seen on a court, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose despite the cloudy day. Martin's grip tightened around his coffee mug as she cast a dismissive glance toward his property before disappearing inside her house. "Got you," he whispered. The previous night, unable to sleep, Martin had heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle driving too close to his property around 2 a.m. He'd rushed to the window just in time to see taillights disappearing around the corner, taillights that looked suspiciously like those on Cynthia's Mercedes. Martin slicked on his gardening shoes and walked outside to assess the damage. The fresh tracks told the story clearly. Someone had deliberately cut the corner, driving right over his hedge instead of making the proper turn at the intersection. 4 feet of carefully pruned boxwood lay flattened, branches snapped, and leaves scattered across his lawn. "Morning, Martin." "Oh dear, what happened to your hedge?" Martin turned to see his next-door neighbor, Eleanor, walking her corgi. Unlike most residents who kept to themselves, Eleanor had welcomed Martin to the neighborhood with homemade banana bread and genuine kindness. "Happened again," Martin said, gesturing to the tire tracks. "Third time this month." Eleanor shook her head. "That's terrible. You've put so much work into this garden." She lowered her voice. "You know who it is, don't you?" Martin nodded. "I have my suspicions." "Cynthia's been on a power trip ever since she became HOA president," Eleanor confided. "Last month, she sent violation notices to half the street for unapproved mailbox designs. The mailboxes that came with the houses when they were built." Martin sighed. His own interactions with Cynthia had begun 3 months ago when she left a printed notice in his mailbox claiming his hedge exceeded the HOA's height restrictions by 2 inches. He measured it himself and found it well within guidelines, but that hadn't stopped the escalating harassment, weekly reminder notices, pointed comments at community meetings, and now, apparently, vehicular vandalism. As Eleanor continued walking, Martin knelt beside his damaged hedge, gently lifting a broken branch. 30 years designing precision machinery had taught him many things: patience, attention to detail, and how to solve problems systematically. His fingers traced the tire track impression in the soil, his engineer's mind already calculating angles, weights, and possibilities. "You know," he said quietly to himself as he gathered the broken foliage, "I think it's time to design something special for you, Cynthia." He stood up, brushing soil from his hands, a plan already forming. It wouldn't be revenge exactly. Martin considered himself above petty retaliation. No, what he had in mind was more elegant, a lesson in consequences, delivered with the precision and inevitability of a well-designed machine. Cynthia Harrington had no idea what was coming. The following week passed in a blur of activity for Martin. His garage, once an immaculate workspace organized with the precision of the engineering lab he'd managed for decades, now resembled a mad scientist's laboratory. Drafting paper covered his workbench, detailed technical drawings annotated with measurements and calculations. Parts ordered online arrived daily: small sensors, microcontrollers, weatherproof housings, and various components that his neighbors would have struggled to identify. Martin hadn't slept much. A combination of anger over his destroyed hedge and excitement about his project kept his mind racing well into the night. He found himself falling back into the familiar rhythm of problem-solving, the same intense focus that had earned him 3 patents during his career. "What exactly are you building in there?" Eleanor asked on Thursday afternoon, stopping by with a container of homemade soup. She peered curiously at the workbench through the open garage door. Martin smiled, placing a tarp over his work. "Let's just call it a specialized security system." "For the hedge?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. In a manner of speaking, Martin accepted the soup gratefully. "How's the neighborhood been while I've been busy in my cave?" Eleanor rolled her eyes. "Cynthia's on another crusade. The Johnsons put up a basketball hoop for their kids last weekend, and she's already circulated a petition claiming it disrupts the aesthetic harmony of the community." "Doesn't her teenage son play basketball?" "He does," Eleanor confirmed. on the private court she had installed in their backyard last year, which mysteriously didn't require HOA approval despite being visible from the street. Martin shook his head. Rules for thee, but not for me. Exactly. Oh, and there's an emergency HOA meeting tonight. Something about addressing persistent landscaping violations. Martin didn't need to ask who those violations pertain to. The meeting that evening was held in the community clubhouse, a building as pretentious as it was impractical, with uncomfortable chairs arranged in tight rows. Martin arrived precisely on time to find the room already filled with neighbors, their expressions ranging from bored to anxious. Cynthia stood at the front, a laser pointer in hand, projecting photos onto a screen. As you can see, she was saying as Martin found his seat in the back row, some properties are failing to maintain community standards. The image on screen was unmistakably Martin's home, specifically his damaged hedge. Item 4 in our covenant clearly states that all landscaping must be maintained in a neat and orderly fashion. Cynthia continued, her voice carrying the practiced condescension of someone who enjoyed wielding petty authority. Damaged or dying foliage must be removed promptly. Martin felt his blood pressure rising but forced himself to remain calm. He'd anticipated this move. Furthermore, Cynthia clicked to the next slide, showing a close-up of the tire tracks through his hedge. Using landscaping areas for vehicular access is strictly prohibited. A ripple of confused murmurs spread through the room. Even by HOA standards, this was absurd. Martin raised his hand and stood before being acknowledged. I'd like to clarify something, Cynthia. Those tire tracks aren't from my vehicle. They're from someone repeatedly driving over my hedge in the middle of the night. Cynthia's smile tightened. Do you have evidence of this alleged vandalism? I've filed 3 police reports, Martin replied evenly. And I've installed security cameras as of yesterday. This wasn't precisely true, as cameras weren't operational yet, but the flash of alarm that crossed Cynthia's face was worth the small deception. Well, she recovered quickly. Regardless of how the damage occurred, Section 4.3 requires prompt remediation. The committee is giving you 7 days to replace the damaged hedge or face daily fines. Several neighbors turned to look at Martin sympathetically, but none spoke up. The unspoken community rule was clear. Don't become Cynthia's next target. Martin simply nodded. I'll address it this weekend. The meeting dragged on for another hour, covering everything from approved mailbox colors to the proper storage of trash bins. As people filed out afterward, Martin noticed Cynthia watching him from across the room, her expression calculating. Back home, Martin worked late into the night, making final adjustments to his creation. By 2 a.m., he was ready for installation. Dressed in dark clothing, he carried his equipment to the damaged section of hedge, carefully positioning sensors in the soil and concealing them among the remaining foliage. The system was elegant in its simplicity. Pressure sensors would detect a vehicle driving over that specific section of hedge, triggering a response that would be both harmless and impossible to trace back to him. There would be no. The shriek that pierced the pre-dawn stillness of Oak Ridge Estates was exactly what Martin had been waiting for. He sat upright in bed, a smile spreading across his face as he heard car doors slamming and angry shouting from the direction of his hedge. Martin took his time getting dressed. He brewed a cup of coffee, savoring the aroma as the commotion outside continued. Only after he finished half his cup did he casually stroll to his front door, opening it to survey the scene with well-practiced surprise. Cynthia Harrington stood beside her Mercedes, her face contorted with rage, designer tennis outfit now splattered with vibrant purple dye. The same purple dye that covered the front quarter panel of her pristine white vehicle in an unmistakable pattern of splashes and drips. A small crowd of neighbors in bathrobes and pajamas had gathered at a safe distance, watching the spectacle with poorly concealed amusement. You! Cynthia screamed when she spotted Martin. You did this. Martin approached slowly, coffee mug in hand. Good morning, Cynthia. Looks like you've had some car trouble. This is vandalism, criminal damage. I'm calling the police. She thrust her purple-stained hands toward him. This won't come off. Martin examined the dye calmly. Actually, it will. It's a water-soluble theatrical dye. Should wash off with some effort, though I'd recommend professional cleaning for the car. He took another sip of coffee. Interesting that it happened right where my hedge keeps getting damaged. Are you admitting to this? Cynthia hissed, pulling out her phone. I'm not admitting to anything, Martin replied evenly. Just making an observation about correlation. You see, as an engineer, I appreciate cause and effect relationships. Eleanor appeared from the growing crowd, her expression struggling between concern and delight. Cynthia, what happened? This criminal booby trapped the street. Cynthia gestured wildly at Martin. I don't see any trap, Martin said, looking pointedly at his damaged hedge and the tire tracks leading directly through it. Just a hedge that someone keeps driving over. Eleanor glanced between them. Were you driving across Martin's property again, Cynthia? I most certainly was not. Cynthia sputtered, but the tire tracks told a different story. Martin nodded toward his newly installed security camera. I'm sure the footage will clear everything up for the police. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Cynthia's face as she looked at the camera, then at the gathered neighbors watching with undisguised interest, many with phones raised to capture the moment. This is unauthorized surveillance, she tried, pivoting to territory she felt more comfortable with. The HOA has strict rules about security cameras. All properly approved last month, Martin countered. I have the paperwork signed by the committee treasurer. Happy to show the officers when they arrive. The mention of paperwork seemed to deflate Cynthia slightly. If there was one thing Martin had learned about dealing with HOA tyrants, it was the importance of documenting everything and knowing the bylaws better than they did. I don't have time for this nonsense, Cynthia finally said, attempting to regain her dignity despite the purple splotches covering her white outfit. I have an important breakfast meeting. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, Martin. She climbed back into her dye-splattered Mercedes and drove away, leaving purple-tinged tire marks along the asphalt. As the crowd began to disperse, Eleanor sidled up to Martin. That was quite a coincidence, she said quietly. Her driving over your hedge and immediately getting covered in purple dye. Martin sipped his coffee. Quite a coincidence indeed. The dye will really wash off? Eventually, Martin confirmed it's the same type theaters use. Messy, but harmless. Takes about 7 washes to completely disappear from skin. Though, Eleanor stifled a laugh. In her car? A good detailer can handle it. Might be expensive, though. You're sure there's no way she can prove? Martin shook his head. The device was completely passive. No electronics, no moving parts that could be traced back to me. Just a simple pressure release system using completely biodegradable materials that have already dissolved. The engineer in him couldn't help adding, it was actually quite elegant in its simplicity. Eleanor looked impressed. You've thought of everything. Not quite everything, Martin said, his expression growing more serious. This won't stop her. It might even make things worse. What will you do if she comes back tonight? Another color. Martin smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I believe in escalating responses to persistent problems. Later that afternoon, Martin spotted Cynthia's Mercedes parked in her driveway. The purple dye remained clearly visible despite an obvious attempt to clean it. He watched through. The police officers who responded to Cynthia's call were familiar faces to Martin. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen had taken his 3 previous reports about the hedge vandalism. Evening, Mr. Lawson, Officer Rodriguez said as Martin greeted them at the sidewalk. Got a complaint about suspicious activity. I'm just working on my landscaping, Martin explained, gesturing to the hedge and the gardening tools he'd strategically placed nearby, trying to repair the damage from the repeated drive-overs. Cynthia marched across the street, still bearing faint purple stains on her hands despite obvious scrubbing. He's installing more traps. He's already vandalized my car with some kind of paint bomb. Officer Chen looked between them. We did receive a report about an incident this morning, but no official complaint was filed. I've been consulting with my attorney, Cynthia said, lifting her chin. He advised documenting the pattern of harassment before pressing charges. Martin maintained his composure. Officers, as you know from my previous reports, someone has been repeatedly driving over my hedge in the middle of the night. I've installed security cameras, as recommended in your report. He pointed to the visible camera under his eaves. I'm simply replanting and repairing the damage. He's lying, Cynthia interjected. Check what he's really putting in that hedge. Officer Rodriguez sighed the weary sigh of a public servant too familiar with neighborhood disputes. Mr. Lawson, would you mind if we take a look at what you're working on? Not at all, Martin said pleasantly, leading them to the hedge. I'm installing these solar-powered garden lights to better mark the corner. They're HOA-approved standard models from Oak Ridge Garden Center. He held up one of the small path lights he purchased specifically for this purpose. The officers inspected the hedge carefully, finding nothing but ordinary gardening work and the innocuous solar lights. Martin had temporarily removed his actual devices as soon as he'd spotted Cynthia watching him from her window. Everything looks in order here, Officer Chen finally said. Mr. Lawson is just doing garden maintenance on his own property. Cynthia's face flushed with anger. What about this morning? My car was damaged by whatever he put in that hedge. Do you have any proof that Mr. Lawson installed anything? Officer Rodriguez asked. Well, no, but. And did you drive over his hedge before this substance appeared on your car? Cynthia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly for a moment. I most certainly did not. I was simply driving normally around the corner when something sprayed all over my vehicle. Martin stepped forward. Officers, my security camera might have captured the incident. Would you like to review the footage? The color drained from Cynthia's face. That would be helpful. Officer Chen nodded. Inside Martin's house, he connected his laptop to the television and pulled up the security footage. The night vision video clearly showed Cynthia's Mercedes approaching the corner at 5:48 a.m., deliberately swerving to cut across Martin's property through the hedge, then abruptly stopping as something sprayed across the vehicle. There was no sign of any device, just the natural consequence of driving where one shouldn't. Well, Officer Rodriguez said after watching the video twice, it appears your vehicle did drive across Mr. Lawson's property, Mrs. Harrington. That's not what happened, Cynthia stammered. The video must be doctored. The timestamp matches the time of your call this morning, Officer Chen noted, and the vehicle registration is clearly visible. Cynthia changed tactics. Even if I did accidentally clip the corner, it doesn't give him the right to booby-trap his property. That's illegal. Officer Rodriguez turned to Martin. Mr. Lawson, did you place anything in your hedge designed to spray dye? Martin met his gaze steadily. I've been repairing damaged sections of my hedge and installing solar lighting to better mark the property line. As you can see in the video, whatever happened occurred when a vehicle drove over private property where vehicles aren't meant to be driven. Beyond that, I couldn't speculate. The officers exchanged glances. They couldn't prove Martin had installed anything, and the video clearly showed Cynthia trespassing. Mrs. Harrington, Officer Chen said finally, based on this evidence, you were driving on Mr. Lawson's property without permission. If anything was damaged on your vehicle as a result, that would be a civil matter between you and your insurance company. But, furthermore, the officer continued, if you continue to drive across Mr. Lawson's property. The crowd from the HOA meeting spilled into the parking lot to find Cynthia's Mercedes in a state that could only be described as festive. The car alarm wailed as brilliant, multicolored foam expanded from every seam of the vehicle, oozing from beneath the hood, bubbling out from the door frames, and spilling from the partially open windows. The foam sparkled under the parking lot lights, giving the luxury SUV the appearance of a children's birthday party gone terribly wrong. My car, Cynthia shrieked, fumbling with her key fob to silence the alarm. What have you done to my car? Martin hung back, his expression carefully neutral as other homeowners pulled out phones to capture the spectacle. The expanding foam continued to grow, enveloping the Mercedes in a rainbow-colored cloud that resembled a giant cotton candy disaster. It looks like some kind of prank, offered HOA board member Gerald Thompson, failing to hide his amusement. Maybe some neighborhood kids. It wasn't kids. Cynthia stabbed a finger in Martin's direction. It was him. This is exactly like what happened yesterday. Martin raised his eyebrows. I've been inside the meeting room with all of you for the past 45 minutes. How could I possibly have done this? You set it up beforehand. It's some kind of timer device. That's quite an accusation, Cynthia, said Eleanor, stepping forward. Martin's an engineer, not a magician. He can't make foam appear out of nowhere inside a locked car. Martin nodded appreciatively at Eleanor before addressing the gathering. I don't know what's happening to Mrs. Harrington's vehicle, but I suggest someone call the fire department to make sure whatever that substance isn't hazardous. The mention of potential dangers shifted the mood. Board member Thompson immediately pulled out his phone to call emergency services, while others backed away from the foam-covered Mercedes. Cynthia pushed through the crowd to confront Martin directly. This is harassment. Criminal damage. I'll have you arrested. For what exactly? Martin asked calmly. For this, she gestured wildly at her foam-engulfed car. I've been in full view of at least 30 witnesses for the past hour, Martin pointed out. And I have no idea what that substance is, though it does look remarkably similar to the non-toxic biodegradable foam used in children's science experiments. Completely harmless, but quite messy. Cynthia's face contorted with rage. You engineered this somehow. You booby-trapped my car. That would be quite impossible, Martin replied. Your car was locked, wasn't it? Besides, why would I target your vehicle specifically? Unless, he paused thoughtfully. Have you been driving somewhere you shouldn't be? The gathered homeowners went silent, many exchanging glances as they connected the dots between yesterday's purple dye incident, the security footage they'd just seen in the meeting, and this new development. Fire truck sirens wailed in the distance as Cynthia's lawyer pushed through the crowd. Everyone step back, he commanded. This is a crime scene and we'll be pursuing full legal remedies against the responsible parties. Actually, came a new voice. This is fascinating from a legal perspective. All heads turned to see Judge Raymond Wilson, a retired circuit court judge who lived at the end of the block and rarely attended HOA meetings. He approached the foam-covered Mercedes with professional curiosity. Mrs. Harrington, did you park here when you arrived for the meeting? He asked. Of course not, Cynthia snapped. I parked in my reserved space as board president. The judge nodded, peering at the parking space marker. And your reserved space is right there. Cynthia pointed to a sign that clearly read Visitor Parking Only. I see. So you parked in a spot not designated for your use, which is a violation of Section 5.4 of the Covenant. The judge adjusted his glasses. And when exactly did you park here? Just before the meeting started, Cynthia's lawyer interjected, sensing a trap. Interesting, the judge continued, because I arrived 20 minutes early and saw your client's vehicle parked at the corner of Mr. Lawson's property, halfway across his replanted hedge. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. That's preposterous, Cynthia sputtered. Judge Wilson, you must be mistaken. I've been on the bench for 32 years, Mrs. Harrington. I'm very careful about my observations, particularly when they involve repeated patterns of behavior that I've witnessed personally. The judge turned to address the crowd. I've observed Mrs. Harrington's vehicle cutting across Mr. Lawson's corner at least 7 times in the past month, and I've mentioned it twice at previous board meetings.